Good afternoon, everyone. I'll call to order the Special Community Planning Committee meeting for Monday, July 23rd, 2025. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, including our near neighbors, the Chianu First Nation, and also the Sauk First Nation. So, committee, you have before you an agenda. Are there any additions or proposed amendments? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve? So Mayor Little and Councillor Donaldson, all in favor? And that's carried, thank you. Before we turn to public participation, I'll just make a few comments about the meeting. The purpose of today is to consider steps toward meeting the obligations the province has established for local governments in regards to housing. These obligations were set out through a number of legislative changes that were introduced in 2023, including amendments to the Local Government Act. So among other things, those amendments required us to develop an interim housing needs report, updating the 2021 housing needs report. This was completed in late 2024 and was approved by Council in November. We now have another task before us, and that is to align the results of the housing needs report into our official community plan and our land use bylaw. As many of you recall, that report showed significant need exists based on the methodology that the government prescribed in doing the interim housing needs report. So that need was to be detailed in a 5-year period and in a 20-year span as well. So our planner, Ms. Tara Johnson, will provide us with her assessment on where our OCP and our land use bylaw both stand in terms of enabling the capacity for such growth. In Ms. Johnson's report, she'll also note other elements in terms of meeting the legislative requirements before us, and she's provided us with an outline of these in the report in the agenda package, and she's also provided us with a public engagement plan that will meet the public consultation requirements that come with an OCP amendment. So committee, you probably know this, but there are 2 options that we're asked to consider, and we'll come back to those after Ms. Johnson's presentation and after public participation. And as you know, there is a deadline of December 31st of this year to make those changes. And so with those opening comments, I'll now ask if there's any members of the community that wish to address the council. And as you come to the mic, please say your name and your street number, and you've got 4 minutes. And as we always do, we always ask you to make respectful comments. So thank you so much.
I have pushed the button. Sarah Anthony, Machosen Road. I just saw this meeting was happening, so when you let me know, and I spoke quickly to some of the members of the Hicks. So I have some comments from a couple of the members. First from Sherry Rourke. She said, staff report confirms enough subdividable land exists for 20-year housing needs, but subdividable lots and vacant land are not affordable for most residents. Land often costs $75,000 plus for property in Machosen. So building costs right now are over $500 a square foot for new construction. Of course, Sherry would know that. The average house size is about 3,000 square feet. So we're talking 1.5 to 1.2 million per home. That requires $25,000 in annual household income and a massive down payment. Out of reach for most young families, workers, and farm-based households. Many properties have unauthorized suites, carriage houses, RVs used as permanent dwellings, multiple informal housing units. This reflects unmet need, not a non-compliance. People are creating their own solutions. Farming and agriculture can't sustain $2 million mortgages, and I can attest to that. Lack of legal, affordable housing makes agricultural businesses unviable. Temporary and permanent farm worker housing must be supported in the OCP. Council should be using this housing review to legalize existing non-conforming dwellings, expand flexible housing, suites, carriage homes, worker housing, support affordable intergenerational living and rural resilience. Numbers on a report don't house real people. Time to align policies with reality. She said, let's do better. And I agree with her. Just making sure this comment makes sense here. Many of the remaining large subdividable properties haven't been subdivided because it isn't financially feasible given the topography, making those lots basically perpetual green spaces. So yeah, those are the comments that Sherry had, and I really want to reinforce the thoughts about the farming thing. Like, it is so impossible for someone to come out here, buy land, and build a home and expect to make that money off farming. It's just not a thing that happens. I mean, there's a lot that would have to happen for that to change that you probably can't do in this room, but there are certainly things that can make life a little easier for the people who are living here currently or bringing people in. And I think, again, making the possibility of more lower income places available for people who are farm workers. We in Eric have been trying to get farm labor lately, and it is a bit of a struggle. People need a lot more money right now to be able to afford just to live. And if they're in town, it's hard for them to come out here. We really do prefer to hire people who are in Metchosin or at least close, but it is difficult. It's basically only people who are still living with their parents because that's who can afford to live here. I had some notes also from Ellen. They were a bit shorter, but I think they were important. Her big concern was about having good community engagement with this, and I would also agree with that. She asked, are you going to clean up the OCP so it doesn't read like zoning bylaws? I think she was referring to the OCP consultant that came in. He was mentioning it should be higher level, and the bylaw is where the detail should lie. She said there was nothing about amending the bylaw regarding dwelling size, the carriage suites, and matching the ALR rules about 90 square meters with the ALR land. So that would be, again, a big one to me. I would love to see as we talk a lot about having the ALR rules, but not for some reason that one, which I think is a really good one, that having that 90 square feet was brought in by the ALC because they saw a need for it for multi-generational homes.
So, Ms. Anthony, I think you've reached your time.
Oh, okay.
But you know what? Once we do a round, you can come back and finish up.
That was pretty much the end of it, but you never know, I might think of more.
Can I ask one question of you, though? Ms. Rourke gave you some figures about price per square foot of build. Could you tell me once again what those were?
Sorry, just got to get back to the right comments here.
I think it was Councillor Donaldson said
500 square feet, okay. Or $500 per square feet. So yeah, prices have gone up a lot. I mean, my mother-in-law just built, and it was a lot of money to build not a very big house. It's not what it used to be anymore. It's a lot for people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Great.
Again, press the button, or is it staying on?
Yeah.
Dan Cote, Leafield Road. I'd like to encourage council to not just aim for the league minimum, the absolute bare minimum that the province is going to require of us. We as a municipality, I don't feel are pulling our weight when it comes to the Southern Island and housing needs. In fact, I don't think we're creating enough housing for our own children. Okay. We send most of them out. There isn't housing for them, and if there is, they can't afford it. We're relying on municipalities, our brothers and sisters on the Lower Island, who are paddling, and we're a passenger here. The potential that we're all seem to be working on has been potential for many, many years. It's still potential. But if it's still potential, it probably hasn't been developed for a reason. Over cost per square foot, too much, inaccessible. I think we need to deal with the applications that come to us and try to make the best of them rather than looking for the perfect fit scenario where we don't have to change anything. The idea that we can present this to the province and say, well, we still have 400 plus properties that could be developed. We had that 20 years ago. We've only moved ahead a couple of inches in this game. Okay? I'd encourage the council to deal with the proposals that come forward rather than waiting for the easy ones to come out of the woods.
Eric White, Machosen Road. There were some numbers on CFAX 1070 the other day about the cost to live in Victoria, and I think it is something that should be reflected when we look at the OCP of, are we creating a generational community where families can continue and pass on from generation to generation, or are we creating a community that's passed on from wallet to wallet, from the richest bidder to the richest bidder? For example, in Oak Bay, it is $580,000 annual income to own a piece of property there. In Langford, just to own a condo, don't quote me on these numbers, these came off CFAX 1070, it's $230,000 annual household income to have a condo there. It's $280,000 to have a house. I'm not sure where Machosen fits into that, but having such a household income ratio that's so high makes it hard for young people and families in general to maintain Machosen as a community of family and farming. And I hope that's thought about when we look at the OCP. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. White.
Sandra Lamb, Hackamore Drive. Upon review of the 2025 Housing Capacity Analysis Report, I ask, how can Council accept this report with a projected need of 852 homes in 20 years when the BC government statistical analysis projects a population decrease of Machosen residents to 4,916 by 2041. Also, my worry is that Council's claim they look to change parts of Machosen's OCP and land use bylaws to accommodate the housing capacity report. Even more, while reviewing these changes, Council wishes to exclude consideration of current factors like community and non-residential policies. The official community plan is a legal document all-encompassing the strengths and values which identify and protect Machosen's uniqueness. By altering Machosen's official community plan and land use bylaws to accommodate the perceived need of 852 homes in 20 years, in consequence, you are planning to change Machosen's identity and rewrite the legal document to reflect your visionary changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lamb. You raise a number of interesting points, and I believe that Ms. Johnson, our planner, is going to tackle some of those as we go. So thank you very much. Anyone else for public participation? Okay. With that, I'm going to continue with the agenda. And so now, if I could, I would like to ask Ms. Johnson to come up and provide us with an overview of the information that's before us, and also lay out what I think, again, one of the questions that we are going to be asked is, how are we going to move ahead with this process? And two options are laid out before us, and we'll have a chance to either consider both of them or amend them as we see best. But for now, I'd like to turn things over to Ms. Johnson. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and members of the public. As Mr. Shukin, or Councillor Shukin, has already stated, the purpose of this presentation today is to discuss how the district will be reviewing and updating their official community plan and land use bylaw to meet provincial legislation that requires these bylaws be aligned with the most recent housing needs report. So just a quick summary, in late 2003, the province passed legislation intended to increase the supply, selection, and affordability for people to gain housing in BC. The first provincial requirement under the small scale multi-unit housing component of Bill 44 has been completed. This did not impact the district much, as the land use bylaw already enabled the required minimum densities of 1 secondary suite or detached secondary suite, providing that the lot was 0.8 hectares or larger. The district did not meet the provincial criteria for density beyond this, being a rural community outside the urban containment boundary with no municipal or regional sewer systems and many properties being on wells. The second requirement under the proactive planning component of Bill 44 was to update the district's housing needs assessment to include new provincial requirements to calculate the 20-year housing need. And this was done using a provincial prescribed methodology. And through this methodology, there were demand buffers, which was one of the reasons why numbers seem higher than the previous housing needs assessment. This interim housing needs report was completed in November 2024 with council endorsement of it. The third requirement under the proactive planning component of Bill 44 is to update the OCP and land use bylaw by the end of the year to ensure that there is sufficient housing capacity and housing policy to accommodate the housing needs that are identified in the housing needs report. As for the other statutes that are up there, Bill 46 does not apply to the district at this time, as the district currently doesn't have a development cost charge bylaw, and Bill 47, transit-oriented areas, does not apply to the district either. So the interim housing needs report, which is appended to the district's 2021 housing needs assessment, anticipates that the district needs to accommodate an additional 852 new housing units in the next 20 years. There is no requirement that the 20-year unit number must be built, nor is the district required to report on the construction of these units because the district of Metchosin is not under a housing target order. The 2021 housing needs assessment has identified key areas of housing need in Metchosin, and these are affordable housing, rental housing, housing for families, housing for seniors, housing for people with disabilities, and homelessness. And I just wanted to point out too, I explained in my report that the Local Government Act allows for a municipality to identify other housing needs that are outside of these identified housing needs. And that is the reason why I have suggested to explore temporary housing for farm worker accommodation because this was identified in the agricultural plan that was recently completed. The Local Government Act requires that the official community plan and land use bylaw be aligned with the most recent housing needs report by the end of the year. The OCP must include housing policies that include a broader range of housing types, for example, family housing, seniors housing, and other classes of housing need. The municipality must also demonstrate that there is capacity in the OCP and the land use bylaw to accommodate the 20-year number. So that's where we're at the next step. So we're going to be undertaking the legislative OCP update to comply with these new provincial requirements. To determine if the district needed to plan for growth, a housing capacity analysis was completed to see if there was enough capacity under the existing residential OCP land use designations and existing residential zones to accommodate the 20-year housing need. The analysis confirms that there is sufficient capacity to support the 20-year housing need, and through the analysis, there was basic assumptions applied, so it was a very conservative number, and this is following along on previous OCP analysis as well. The analysis this means that if we meet the capacity, there is no provincial requirement to increase density beyond what is currently allowed. So in the OCP, there's remaining capacity for about 860 units, and in the land use bylaw, there is remaining zoned capacity for 1,360 units. The province has clarified in their housing webinars that updating the entire OCP is unnecessary to meet the intent of Bill 44, as long as housing capacity is addressed and there are policies to address the broader range of housing types. With 6 months remaining before the end of the year to implement these final requirements of Bill 44, a housing-focused OCP and land use bylaw review and update is proposed, with a scope that is limited to the following targeted amendments to fulfill the legislative requirements. So keeping data current, so integrating the housing needs report into the OCP. This consists of adding in the new 20-year housing projections, and this is a provincial requirement. We cannot just not add in the 20-year projections. Updating demographics to be current to 2021, revising the population and housing projections to support the housing needs, updating building permit statistics and relevant tables, and then some housekeeping amendments are also proposed, and these include updates to correct outdated legislation references, updating maps to be current. The last update to the OCP was 2010. And correcting formatting. Reviewing existing housing policies is required to align with the directions outlined in the housing needs report. Currently, the OCP does not address all classes of identified housing need, and through the public engagement process proposed, we can explore what different types of housing is needed to support different points in life to meet specific housing needs. We can learn about, is there a need for new housing types, and how can we improve existing housing to meet specific housing needs, for example. I have provided a list of out-of-scope policy areas to keep the project as a housing focused, and that's just due to the deadline that the province has given. If the Metchosin OCP was updated, if there was a comprehensive update, say a few years ago, this would be a little bit of a different conversation, but an OCP from 1995 to do a comprehensive review would likely take longer than a year. I mean, we want to probably potentially 2 years. So it's something not to be taken lightly. But in this project, I think that there is opportunity to improve housing within Metchosin to address current housing needs. So out of scope policy areas are a comprehensive review of the OCP. The vision of the OCP is not going to change. Site-specific land use amendments or technical updates, any new development permit areas. There's been a lot of plans that have been adopted over time. We won't be able to do a full integration of these plans because that would trigger a comprehensive OCP update. Incorporation of any new flood construction levels or sea level rise, just anything that sort of falls outside of a housing focused work area. Any ideas and concerns regarding issues that are outside the scope of this proposed housing focused review and update will be recorded, and it will be saved for future OCP land use bylaw review processes. The next required OCP review will need to be completed by 2030. However, the district can conduct a review of its OCP and land use bylaw anytime before that. And it's recommended that following this review process, staff will look to council for direction on when to proceed with a comprehensive OCP and land use bylaw review, which I hope ideally will be before 2030. A draft community engagement plan has been presented as part of the staff report. The OCP update proposes to apply a streamlined approach to consultation engagement while still meeting legislative requirements. Concurrent engagement on related updates to the land use bylaw will be incorporated within these engagement activities. The engagement activities are structured to reflect the limited scope of the OCP housing update, and public engagement is planned within all 3 phases of the project. The first round of public engagement includes a postcard mail out, an online survey, and 3 community drop-in events. And the second round of public engagement will include a housing policy directions open house, where the community can review and provide comments on draft policies that are being proposed. And the third round of engagement will take place during the public hearing process after first and second reading of the bylaws are considered. The communication plan is to have a project website to keep the community updated, to send out an informational postcard to all residential addresses in Metchosin. The postcard will give a project summary. It will provide a link to the project webpage and a link to the online survey. Draft survey questions have been provided as part of the draft communication strategy, and looking for comments on those questions and suggestions for more questions. Engagement with referrals and stakeholders will be through direct outreach through email and formal notification. And then the feedback that's gathered from the public engagement process will help create and refine the housing focused policies in an updated version of Metchosin's OCP that will fulfill the legislative requirements. And this is the recommendation before you tonight to initiate the project. The policy areas for review: housing needs report integration is a mandatory requirement to include in the OCP. Policy review respecting each class of housing needs is also a mandatory requirement. And suggestions for other policy areas are policies affecting short-term rental. That's another housing statute that has come forth from the province in 2023. And we all know short-term rental can impact long-term rental. So having that as a discussion, also temporary housing options for farm workers. And if there are any other policy areas to specifically look at through this project, looking for feedback on that. But the policy review respecting each class of housing needs, a lot will come out of that policy review as well. And that concludes my presentation.
If you could just remain there, I can ask the committee if you have any questions. I've got a few thoughts and questions, but I want to turn it over to my colleagues here. Councillor Craig.
Thanks very much through the chair. Ms. Johnson, I'm just looking at the recommendation and I wanted to be clear. The second bullet under option 1B is the policy review respecting each class of housing needs required to be addressed from the housing needs report. And I take it those are the areas that you've identified later in the document: affordable housing, rental housing, housing for families, housing for seniors, housing for people with disabilities and homelessness. And that's not optional at this point.
Through the chair, correct, that's not optional.
Thank you. And I'm just looking between option 1 and option 2. It seems to be that option, we were required to follow those. The other question I had was policies affecting short-term rental in residential areas. It's the next bullet down. Now already we've been following the provincial requirements in that vein of such that people who have short-term vacation rentals must live on the property, and then they can rent out either their principal residence or a secondary dwelling. What else could we do in that area? Or is it just those things that we've already implemented that we need to describe in our OCP?
Sorry, through the chair. For short-term rental, the OCP has no policies currently on rental housing. So if the community feels that there should be restrictions on short-term rental in any way, maybe there is a policy in the official community plan that talks about managing short-term rentals, limiting it to one per property, or directing changes into the zoning bylaw to do something like that. But there may not necessarily be a direct policy that says short-term rental, but rental housing needs to be considered, and short-term rental might fall into that realm of consideration when you're looking at creating or refining policies that are for rental housing.
So just to follow up through the chair, the idea is that we've put in place the requirements the province asked us to. As far as I know, that's running along now. And this will be a question to include those policies in the OCP, and then anything additional that we hear that people are interested in looking at that council would like to see followed through with.
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah. And also keeping in mind that the official community plan is a high-level document, so it is going to provide direction to the land use bylaw, which is the regulatory document. So if they want to see changes happen, there's going to be that direction, and then when the changes occur in the land use bylaw, they have to align with the OCP. So there's a reason for these changes. The direction will come from that high level. And at this point in time, there's not a whole lot of regulations in the land use bylaw regarding short-term rental.
Mayor Little.
Yeah, thank you through the chair, and congratulations. I know this has taken a significant amount of your effort, so we're very thankful for that. Just a question regarding the STRs. I understood that the short-term rentals, when this was all unfolding with the province, did they have specific requirements that all municipalities must abide by? For instance, having the owner on site, and some communities asked to be outside of those regulations, but the rest of them, unless you made the specific request, you must abide by those policy directions from the province.
Yeah, through the chair, Metchosin is subject to the principal residence requirement of the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act. And there was no option for the district to opt out of that because of the vacancy rate for the Greater Victoria area, which was below 3% for 2 consecutive years. So yes, there is some provincial requirements that must be met regardless of sort of what regulations you have in place. And that's being looked at the provincial level. So it comes in the form of an application. So all short-term rentals have to have a provincial registration number. And so in the district of Metchosin, if they do not meet the principal residence requirement, they will not get a provincial registration number, which means that they cannot operate, regardless whether they have a business license from the district of Metchosin.
And a second question, regarding the outreach to stakeholders, besides the electorate, besides our community members, is the stakeholders, is this like D&D, Beecher Bay, Pearson College, William Head Institution? Is that what they mean by the other stakeholders?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, definitely Beecher Bay, and D&D and I forget the other ones you just said, but the other stakeholders, there's some mandatory ones that are listed in the Local Government Act, and others are depending on what the changes are. So a good example would be if there are no changes that are affecting agricultural land, agricultural policies, then it might not be necessary to refer to the Agricultural Land Commission if there's no change happening in those areas. But if there is, then legislatively we need to send a referral. But Beecher Bay, we will be sending a referral regardless and initiating early engagement.
And just a third comment through the chair. So D&D also has housing out on the land in Petter Bay. And so that's why I was asking about D&D in terms of their seeking their input into the proposed changes.
Through the chair, now I understand. Yes, as a landowner, they will be engaged through that process. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Rep, Councillor Donaldson, anything? Or I can ask my question and you can go ahead, Councillor.
Just on through the chair on that last point, with the community interest groups, there's just two listed here. Is there certain criteria as to who in the community as an interest group would qualify as a stakeholder?
Through the chair, interest groups that, in terms of the advisory committees, it was advisory committees focused on more like housing communities. In terms of the interest groups, no, those were just ones that we came up with. If there's others that you would like to include, then please. We just felt that those ones have a really, they know a lot about the housing within the district of Metchosin, and they would be important to include.
Yeah, the one that sort of came up for me, and it was more on historical, maybe it doesn't apply anymore, would be the MCA for the work that they've done within the community. It kind of crosses over a lot of different areas. It is something to consider at least. Thanks.
I just wondered if in your dealings with the province, have you ever heard got any hint that they might be considering actually enforcing community to have that number of housing, or start saying, okay, you've got to have 10 low-cost houses or residences, or things like that. So far in here it says that there isn't going to be any enforcement or really follow-up on it. I just wondered if you had happened to hear anything that might change.
Through the chair, because the Metchosin's done under a housing target order, no. In terms of meeting the other provincial requirements, I can say that they are looking, and they are likely listening tonight as well, to ensure that the other provincial requirements are included into the official community plan. But in terms of enforcing how many for what housing need.
Thank you, and thanks for the report.
I'm going to ask a few questions if you don't mind, Councillor Grant, then come back to you. So, yeah. Is it a quick question or? Okay, sir, go ahead.
Well, just in following up, we submitted the interim housing report, and was it accepted by the province?
Through the chair, they do not send official responses back to say that they've received it, but they are in the background checking off that they have been completed.
That is a perfect segue into some of my questions. So, Ms. Johnson, there was comments earlier about, the district's role in creating the numbers that we're having to work with now. My understanding is that the methodology was prescribed by the province, and we had very little room to move. It was something we had to do. spelled out exactly how we had to do it, and all contained within the housing needs report regulation. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. We had to follow the prescribed methodology, and the number of units for 20 years do seem large for the district, especially when you're looking at population. The historical population, projections, and even just moving forward from BC stats. But one thing to remember is that this housing needs report is just a snapshot in time, and this has to be done every 5 years. So the next one has to be done prior to 2028, the end of the year. And that might have a totally different number. We know that there's changes in immigration. There's a lot of changes that are happening. And so at that point in time, that's what the housing needs assessment will say. And the OCP update has to follow within 2 years of that housing needs report. So it could be an entirely different number, or maybe not.
Okay. I think that's a really important point, is that we have to do this again. There'll be a whole other process. I suspect there'll be community values that are brought in, and ALR, elements, and yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, the next housing needs report has to be a comprehensive one. And it'll be using the 2026 stats, which come out in 2027. And yes, it'll be, I think, easier to look at OCP updates in the future now that we have all these requirements and methodologies in place. We're already been used to them.
One or two other questions here. So on page 5 of your report, or the agenda package, you state that, the obvious, currently there are no policies which specifically address rental housing, housing for families, housing for seniors, special needs housing, and homelessness. Again, in the OCP. Okay, that's now what we're being asked to do, or I think Councillor Gray pointed this out, it is in the legislation. We have to consider each class of housing need, which are, as someone pointed out, extreme core housing need, persons experience homelessness, suppressed housing formation, anticipated growth. So, and they all have a technical meaning, all of those class of housing needs. But if we do that, if we look into those, are we going to be also able to address, as you note here, rental housing, housing for families, housing for seniors, special needs housing? It might seem like an obvious question, but it doesn't, that the class of housing needs itself doesn't say housing for seniors specifically, but is my question semi-clear?
Through the chair. So through the policy analysis and the public engagement on these different classes of housing need, we will learn more about housing types. Maybe there's a need for housing sizes change. For example, housing for families. They're having trouble accessing housing here because they need something that's 2 or more bedrooms, but not something that's 5 bedrooms. There's a lot of housing here that's, someone said, 3,000 square feet. Or for housing with seniors, maybe they need smaller housing, but what we currently have is too small because they have to design it to be accessible. So through, we already know kind of what the need is. We're just going to be fleshing through in the public engagement, like what can we do? What are some options? How can we increase the size of the detached secondary suite? Can we add a temporary use permit area in the official community plan to allow for farmers to actually have an option to apply to the Agricultural Land Commission for temporary housing? Because at this point, they don't even have that option because we only allow 2 dwelling units on a parcel.
One technical question for you. So suppressed housing suppressed household formation. So that's a category. What I understand it to be is it addresses those households that were unable to form between 2006 and the present date due to a constrained housing environment, with a focus on young people. So that class of housing need would likely get to families, I would imagine.
Potentially, yeah.
Possibly. Okay. Thank you. Great. Okay. Committee, we do also have a survey, a draft survey before us. But before we get to that, I've got an observation or two. But is there anything else for Ms. Johnson? And if there isn't right now, maybe we can ask her to have a seat and be available for questions. But Mayor Little.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I was just wondering if you could comment on the population projections. There was a comment made at public participation regarding the population projections where the 2041 project BC Stats projections, BC Stats is at negative 0.6%. If you could comment on that, that would be great.
Yeah, through the chair. So BC Stats, they have their own methodologies, and the 2041 is currently just an estimate, and they are estimating a population decline. I don't know their methodology exactly, but I can guess, we do have a high proportion of seniors. I think 44.5% of the population is aged 55 and up. So whether they're projecting a decline because the population is not here anymore or moving away, I'm not sure, but it's hard to say because maybe there's that opportunity for families to be moving in. So yeah, it's interesting. But BC Stats, their estimates can change. The projections are a little bit more accurate, and I think that was the 20, what's 2021, 20, I forget the numbers in there, but yeah. So sorry, I couldn't elaborate anymore. I can maybe get back to the person who asked.
Well, thank you through the chair. Some people might get excited by the projection of 4916, so we would go below the 5,000, which would have potentially quite an impact on our overall budget. However, realistically, if you've been up and down driveways, as many of us have, I suspect we're not only, I think we're way higher than the 5,200 that is projected, that where we should be at, next year. I can't see us going below 5,000, but I don't have a crystal ball either. But in reality, I can't see that happening.
Yeah, through the chair, it's the good thing about doing these housing needs assessments regularly is that population projections will be looked at regularly as well, that are more, I guess, in tune with what's happening in the municipality.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, this is somewhere. The next big census is when?
2026.
2026.
And it will come out in 2027.
Great, thank you. Okay. So committee, there's quite a bit to discuss here, but the one thing I just want to keep drawing back to is a consideration of what path do we move ahead with. And so we've been given two options for doing that. If we care to amend them or go with them as they're written, we can discuss that. But I was hoping to get some general comments and thoughts. If you don't mind, I'll just kick off with a comment of mine. I very much appreciate the report and the direction that Ms. Johnson is setting out for us. It talks about public engagement on two levels. Number one, to get us to inform the policies that might go into an OCP amendment. And then also, of course, if we are intending to amend the OCP, which we are going to have to do, then of course there's the public hearing process later in the fall. So there will be multiple opportunities for the public to chime in here. I think it is a very wise and mature outlook to narrow the scope of the work. So we're focused just on the housing component of this. And so again, very much appreciate outlining what shouldn't be in scope in terms of this review. We may get to an OCP review in subsequent years, but the mission before us, I think, is pretty clear. So I have my views on which option to go, but I'd like to hear your views before I say anything myself. But Mayor Little?
Yeah, I'll go first. It seems like a very wise option. The first option to pursue. None of this is something that we could do. This is all mandatory. So we know that the Metchosin OCP and the zoning bylaw must align with that housing needs report. And this is demonstrating the capacity over 20 years. It doesn't mean, and I think that's important to reiterate, it doesn't mean that we have a requirement to build or report on the construction of these units. But it's just to demonstrate that we do have the capacity which will meet the guidelines from the province. The option, I like the way the planner has outlined the options, including the public engagement and the outreach to stakeholders. I think this is a logical way to go about it, and I would support option number one.
Yeah, I also support option number one. It's really straightforward. I think, our goal here is just basically to abide by the provincial requirements that we need to do. We aren't going to be getting into a whole discussion about revising the OCP any more than we absolutely have to, because that's going to come up. As a planner mentioned, would take a year, maybe 2 years to review the OCP in depth, which does need to be done at some point down the road. But right now we just have to basically do what the province is insisting that we do, and that is covered in option one.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Yeah, I'm not supporting option one immediately. I think there's a couple of changes that would be good to make. One relates to the survey itself, and I've talked to the planner about some suggestions, and she's looking for ideas. So I'd touch those on second time, but when I look at the actual plan, I'll just find my page here. I too want to say thanks to the planner for all the work that went into this. It's a tremendous amount of effort putting it all together. The community engagement strategy on page 36 of the agenda package, phase 2, the first bullet says the engagement summary and a presentation of draft revisions, I guess, to the OCP and the bylaws would come to council for review. I would prefer that council receive an engagement summary and that we have some discussion about what sort of revisions we'd like to see in the bylaws and provide some direction to staff. My rationale for that is that we're going to go and talk to the public, and there'll be a lot of ideas kicked around, I expect, and I'm impressed with the number of opportunities for the public. But I think it is incumbent upon us as the council to take a look at the summary of comments and then provide direction in terms of where we'd like to go. So that's one thought, and maybe I'll offer some comments about the survey in a minute. So it's just a minor change in the process that I'd like to see.
Okay, Councillor Gray, help me one more time. Where, page 36?
Yeah, it's phase 2, and the first bullet says engagement summary and a presentation of draft revisions to council for review. And I just think there should be a 2-step process.
And I'm sorry, repeat one more time what you think that process should be, the two-step?
Phase 2, I think, should begin with a council review of the engagement summary for our input prior to developing draft OCP and land use planning bylaw revisions. I have a motion written down here to provide at the appropriate time. Does that follow?
Mr. Pyatt.
Yeah, just on that one through the chair, for September, public engagement summary, if we split it and then do a draft, present draft revisions, September is getting tight. We could possibly do 2 sessions, but we'll probably look at have a special meeting or something, fit that all in. Possible, but it's tight for September because in early October there's public open house, so possible, but we'd probably have to have a special council meeting or something to do it all.
Okay.
If you look at the schedule.
Through the chair, it's probably doable to push it, the open house, by a week. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so hearing that this might work, I have no inherent objections to it. I'm just wondering if we can make a note of that in the documents so we don't even need to do a motion, really. And I'll ask Mr. Pyatt and maybe Ms. Hanson if that's possible.
So noted.
So noted. Okay.
Councillor
Okay.
Shukin?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what problem we're trying to fix there. Perhaps Councillor Gray could, I suspect he's worried that we're not going to have time to comment on the public engagement because we can comment right up until the very last moment in considering first and second reading. What is it that you're worried about?
Well, I think that the process, I'd like to see the process followed as such that the council's in charge of the process. And so we are going to, but the staff is going to do the job for us and create open houses and do a survey and collect the information. But it seems to me that it should be the council then that takes a look at the feedback and says, yeah, that looks good. And we want to go in this direction or that. This might be more efficient for staff in terms of where they go with all the input. There potentially be a lot of input on the material here. It just seems to me that we put together, and as the governing body, we would take a look at it and provide direction.
Through the chair, but it does say that engagement summary and presentation of draft revisions to council for review and for comment, I would imagine, at that point, right?
So, I mean, I can say it one more time, I guess. It seems to me that it's our role at council to make the decision about where we're going. If we receive a report that's all done, it's very difficult to make changes to it. Even tonight, I'm just saying, we can make the simple change, and we say, well, do we need a motion or should it some other way? It gets confusing. I'd like to just see it come to us first so we get a chance to look at it. We tend to get things a few days before a meeting, not much time to think about it. If we get the material, we can think about it, we can comment, we'll hear from the public, we'll come back to the next meeting where we'll go on to approve whatever we might put forward. So it's just providing the time to give consideration to the question before us. And there's time, it sounds like there's time to do it, so it doesn't sound like it's a problem otherwise.
Yeah, and I think I take Councillor Gray's, position on this. segmenting it in some ways. So we, like you saying, Councillor Gray is saying, get the input first, be able to use that to inform what direction we give to staff. So it's, I think in best cases, that would be, the way to go. I think the only question here is the tight timeline. So it's great to hear from staff that they could maybe accommodate that. So, yeah. Okay. Very little, do you?
No, that's fine. I'm seeing nodding from staff that can be accommodated. So if it can be accommodated by staff, I think that's great.
Yeah. And there are some logistical things, administrative considerations we have to be mindful of just because of the tight timelines. But yeah, so okay. Anything else? I am going to speak in favor of option 1, and that is because we are limited in what we can do, and I believe the additional point here about housing for farm workers, I think is a very good one, and thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, for bringing that in, because we have heard that like over the years here. But most significantly, we do not have an option in terms of those core what do you call them, the basic, the class of housing needs. We must bring those into the consideration in terms of the OCP and LUB amendment, and it's spelled out here in section 473 of the Local Government Act, and it says that the local government must include housing policies respecting each class of housing needs required to be addressed in the most recent housing needs report, and that's the one that we approved in November. So go ahead.
I could just add a point to that. I think it would be helpful on the farm worker question if we could get some data, just some information, how many farm workers are having trouble finding a place to stay, and just to inform that particular change. I think we have something probably relatively straightforward to do by matching up our OCP and bylaws with the ALC rules. That may be a way to go, but I think it would be helpful at least to know, is this a big problem or is it a few people? And just to get a sense of that through the process. So I agree with you about covering all the topics as required.
Through the chair, potentially we could add a question in the survey to that effect, just as an idea.
That's a great point. I'd be really leery of data at this point, just given, again, timelines and how we're going to get it. But Councillor Donaldson, anything you might add to that?
Well, the one thing I do know is currently farmers and farmhands do have housing in Metchosin. They seem to take care of themselves. The one thing that the planner has cited here, however, is the temporary farmhands. So because it's seasonal, like right now, there's a call out for employees. So would it help for them to have a temporary housing situation that maybe that would be more attractive to having our seasonal farmers? So that is something that she's already cited as something important. And certainly I would like to see something like that in the survey, because the more feedback we get, the better the data collection, because I don't think we really have any data per se. And like you say, it would take a long time. I just know how much we went through with the ag plan and getting data that was extremely outdated. So asking the people that live here in this community, I think we'll get far more accuracy of what's happening on the landscape.
Hats off to Mr. Payette for bringing that idea. Yeah. That's great.
One thing that a question doesn't seem to be raised in the piece here about housing that I think might be worthwhile. I realize it's adding something, but in our strategic plan, we talked about illegal and substandard dwellings. And I think it would be worthwhile picking that up somewhere here. But I'm not sure about that. Maybe that's a question for the planner. I didn't think of it earlier to ask. But I know it's an issue that plagues us somewhat in the community. So when I looked at the definition of core housing needs. One of it is people living in substandard dwellings. So, and that's been something we've talked about, dealing with it. I'm not sure where we would put it in, but perhaps in the survey to ask if that's a concern of people.
Interesting idea, Councillor Gray. Gives me pause personally, and I guess I would maybe ask Mr. Payette or Ms. Johnson if there is a place for that. It does strike me it's sort of out of scope as related as it is. It strikes me more as a bylaw issue rather than as attempting to get into core, like, housing need, long-term housing needed.
Just where it fits is the definition of core housing need. You know, core housing need includes people who are living in substandard housing.
Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, through the chair, having that conversation come up organically might be a better way, like through the policy engagement. And then when staff presents the engagement summary, can talk about that topic if it comes up. But definitely is a valid topic to talk about, and I mean, that could be something that's brought up by planning anyways later on in the process.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Then I had some comments about the survey itself. Do you want to talk about that yet?
Sure. Yeah, I've got one observation.
Or go ahead.
Committee. No, I've got one observation about the survey, but go ahead.
Yeah. I was just, when I read through it, I guess I can appreciate the work put in, and I like the idea that we'll collect some personal information so we know that people live in Metchosin when they're answering. But I'm just wondering about the problem that we have with, bias responses. So we need to take care of the questions. They'll appeal to certain views, and that may be the people who respond to the questionnaire. So I might get a biased result. So just if the staff could think about that as they, finalize the actual format, how do we address that question? And then when I look at the survey, I think that while it asks a number of useful questions, I think it might be worth posing one straightforward question, which is to lay out the current OCP statement about improving affordable housing options, and ask people if they agree with it or if they think we should be doing something else. So basically, we're looking to possibly change the OCP, and we have a section that deals with the affordable housing issues, and maybe that could be laid in the document. And I'm also feeling that it would be useful to show some of the trade-offs. So one of the things that I'm curious about is that I'll give you an example. One of the questions is about, should we change the size of a secondary suite? Should we increase it to, I think it's from, increase the size of it. And I might ask the question a little bit differently, just to get at this. What are the barriers to building a secondary suite? You're not interested, it's cost prohibitive, you're worried about privacy. The current regulations make suites too small. Current regulations don't allow carriage houses. What's the reason people aren't building? And then we could build our policy to address it. That's different than just saying, do you think the suites are too small? Why do people think the suites are too small, or if they do think that? A different example would be, we're seeing an increase in rental of housing here in the documents. But we're also wondering if we shouldn't have more rental housing available. So maybe a question along the lines of, what are the barriers to renting your house or a secondary suite? The answers might be, I live in my house, I don't have a secondary suite, I'm not interested. Protection for landowners and renters under the Provincial Tenancy Act, past experience as a landlord, other. It would just help us get at a little bit more at, why are people not doing this? And is there anything we can do as a district to assist the province in terms of increasing housing, rental housing in this instance? So I have a few ideas like that. As I say, I talked to the planner beforehand, and it sounds like she would be open to looking at some and getting some, putting some other additional questions in the document. So those are just some ideas. I have a few others. What I'm trying to do here is, when I look at the questions, I'm not sure whether the answers will help us, and I'm wondering about getting a bit more granular information or color to it so we know what's going on. Another one might be the ALC rules on farm workers look like this. Does that seem good to you? You know, and asking people if that makes sense to them. That's the sort of thing I'm just thinking about, not taking away from, but just some additional ones. That it would be important for staff, of course, to make sure we don't have too many questions. I'm not talking about making a big, long survey, shorter the better, but just some other ideas to share.
Thanks, Councillor Gray. I just, a few comments myself. The one thing that I might think about in terms of the granularity that we get into is using those questions to help inform our direction, like what information we gain to inform government, like public policy from our perspective. And I kind of had a little bit of a pause when you mentioned, like, what are the barriers to me renting out my house? And again, it might be I think it's probably a valid question, but can we influence, you know, a possible landlord's decisions from our side? Like, is it, yeah, I mean, what's the information we can use that helps us versus what decisions, personal decisions are made from the landlord side? So maybe there's a distinction there that I'm, drawing on, but I'm not. But one observation goes back to, something Councillor Gray said too about bias. And with the first question, it does presume that, it strikes me, it presumes that there's a deep problem. And there is. Clearly, we know that the statistics and the information that we've had, but does everyone see it that way? And maybe there's a way of phrasing that question so just allow people an outlet if they don't have any concerns. And again, do it in a fair way, because that too is biased. You know, I've got my place, nothing else really matters. And that's a position that we really can't take at this table. So, but yeah. And those are, let's go ahead, Councillor Green.
I think that's really important what you're saying. My examples aren't refined in any way. I just thought, how would you do it, or what would it do, just to give something other than yes and no answers on some of the proposals. Basically, when I look at the survey, it's making 3 proposals: carriage houses, increasing the size of secondary suites, and options for temporary farm workers. But I'm wondering just about fleshing those things out a little bit with why would we do those things? Like, what's the rationale? So I wasn't meaning to rewrite the survey, but rather to provide some other questions that might provide a bit more color.
So what I can see happening right now is Ms. Johnson is taking notes, and wheels are turning. I can see them, and I think she's going to refine based on our input. But with that, any other comments, committee? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. The report is very comprehensive, but I'm left with lots of questions as well. The survey, a lot of the questions are more about rentals. But as I'm going through this, you know, talking about temporary housing or rentals in various forms, I'm assuming, and I don't think I'm off the mark, but that these will be policies going into the OCP for housing in general, so that when someone moves here and they got a lot, they build a house. So it's for new build as well, not just for housing we already have. We're going to build a suite or not. We can't force people to build suites. So I don't know how we're going to meet, the 800 and plus dwellings in 20 years, but it's not about meeting it. It's about having projections and guidelines to satisfy the province, and giving people who will move here, or as our community evolves and grows, that we have some guidelines in our OCP, which is definitely our guiding document of our value system. So I'm not really sure that I actually have a question per se, but just mindful, as an example, we've seen people who would want a suite, so come for a variance, whoever, and one in particular, which stands out for me, is the people thought about aging out in place, but also their abilities may change. So when I look at disabilities, they're taking that into consideration. So doing the extensive public engagement, which there is here, and getting information from the community and the stakeholders for us to review, it helps with the educational process, so we can then go back to the community and say, well, these are the things that would be helpful if you considered them. There's nothing forcing people to do this, but when I look at the survey, it's quite heavy on rental as opposed to single family dwellings or multi-generational under one roof, that sort of thing. It's more of an observation. It's not really a question or what to put in there, but it's an observation that it's quite heavy on the rental part of things. And maybe that is affordable. As a government, a local government, we really don't subsidize in this community as far as making things more affordable. It's market driven, and landlords will want to cover all of their costs. So they go with what the market is going to, what it costs to replace things, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. So again, just you're thinking that the survey is more focused on secondary suites, rentals, temporary options, if I'm thinking that correctly, as opposed to the more significant building of a single family detached home. It's like,
it would appear that. I think the other concern that I have, and we've talked about this in not so much our strategic priorities, but we have discussed this about BC assessment and the burden on taxpayers. And the more housing we create, are we cognizant of it out there? So I don't have a question on it. It's just
no, I see what you're observing. The one question I guess I would have is that the audience for the survey is Metchosin residents, and in many respects we're kind of counting on them owning their homes, so there's a bias there in a way toward that, I would think. But Ms. Johnson, any comments or about I think the sentiment is the survey is sort of directed toward secondary suites and rentals.
Through the chair, it is, and it doesn't have to be. It was just looking at the housing needs assessment, and there was a lot of need for rental, but single family owners are the dominant ownership here in Metchosin, and so there should be some questions on the survey that are directed to them as well, and I can think about something like that.
And I mean, there is a general one here, of course. Question number 15 is, what will your housing needs look like in 20 years? How important is multi-generational housing to your family? So some of it is there, I think, but okay. Ms. Johnson, I think it has it as a something she can look at for sure. Okay.
Just as Councillor Donaldson was speaking, I was thinking of this issue about housing for seniors and aging in place. And I can tell you from the medical perspective, what happens is people want to be closer to services as they get older, and we're not far, but the problem is that as you age, eventually you lose your driver's license, and that's a really limiting factor for living in a rural community. Not so much a housing issue, but we have the seniors resource center helps out. MAC has the VHA programs. There's various things going on that are supportive, but they're not housing policy per se. But it's pretty hard to stay in the community after once your driver's license is gone, unless your family are close at hand. So it's a challenge, that one. But it's one to support in the ways that we do, I think. But I'm not sure there's a housing issue that we can deal with. People either live near their families or don't, and if they can pull it off with a secondary suite, it can all work very nicely. We're well set up for it. It's just the issue of whether it actually works for individuals to end up remaining here. That's a tricky one, but I appreciate the comment about abilities change. Our ability to maintain our lifestyles is changes over time.
Thank you. So committee, any more comments on the, what I'd like to do is get as much as input to Ms. Johnson as we can, and then move on if we want to make a decision. So
maybe I just one other one I can think of, which is just looking at the two questions that come up. One is increasing the size of the suites. I'm not necessarily opposed to these things. I just, in terms of getting good questions out there, I might be repeating, but the idea of balancing that a little bit. If we make them larger, then they'll be more expensive. It seems to me. So there's a question. That's why I was talking about trade-offs, somehow addressing that question of that we might have larger ones, but that won't then address the affordability question. The other issue would be in the carriage houses. I'm not sure which, shall I say, I forgot what we call these, affordable housing, rental housing, housing for families, housing for seniors, those questions, whether carriage housing affects any of them, or what problem is that fixing? So again, in the questionnaire, I think it could come out a little bit differently than do you like it. It's more a question of how does that work and what advantage would it provide? And I'm happy to if in terms of process, if you're a good Councillor Shukin with how we're proceeding, I don't mind supporting option one if we're agreeing that more or less we'll have a chat with a planner and she can make the final decisions on how it goes, but we provide some input. That's great. And likewise with the idea of the change we've already discussed.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, perfect. And, I think one of the reasons why there is focus on, there's like the carriage house questions about secondary suites is potentially the way that we're going to achieve the housing targets. Sorry, not the housing targets, but the capacity. That's so often where the additional housing is going to be, if I'm not mistaken. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, through the chair, it's that, but it's also just the amount of public inquiries that have come in, and those are really the top two. And giving options to community, and if we can do that through diversity of housing types and size, I think that will allow. It will reach more needs potentially. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the person who owns the property or who's building it to decide what they can. But if they have an option of, a 70 square meter detached suite or a 90 square meter detached suite, they have those options.
Okay, great. So, Mayor Little, thank you.
Just a quick question to the planner through the chair. I was just wondering, would there be any benefit to having a question, what is the first 3 digits of your postal code? And that would identify the chosen residents as opposed to other residents who may be filling out the survey. Because really what we want is Machosen residents, right? And they wouldn't identify their specific household without the last 3 digits in the postal code.
Through the chair, yes. Do I have a question similar to that? Or maybe not?
I didn't see one.
Maybe not, then yes.
There is a place called personal information. You just hadn't filled it in yet.
Through the chair, yeah, we can add something along those lines.
So again, just to be as site specific as we can, or community. Yeah. Okay, great.
So are you looking for somebody to move an option?
I am. Do we want? Is there any more input on this survey? And very much, yeah, we should move on with the options.
Okay, with that, then I would make a motion to recommend to council that we approve option number 1.
Great. Seconded by Councillor Donaldson. Discussion. Councillor Gray.
Just one other point to raise, I guess, and that's the issue of the notion that people have about, concern about the aquifer, concern about, the natural spaces and all that kind of thing. What we're talking about here, I think, is keeping with the capacity that we already have in our bylaws, and it's just sort of whether or not that capacity gets taken up or not. So I'm thinking it's not as central a question about the natural spaces, but I'm asked the others in the council if they have the same take on that.
Yeah, no, just speaking personally, water and the limitations that brings is a huge consideration. Like especially developing even a secondary suite in an upland area, there's an inherent limitation. Not that it can't be met by bringing trucked in water or capturing a lot of rainwater, but it's there in the ground. Sorry, it's not there in the ground often. But again, question 18 is: do you have any other housing concerns that we should consider? And those environmental conditions, I think, are absolutely fair game to raise. I will just mention I'm going to support option 1 as well. I will note that throughout this whole process, there have been some hair-raising moments. When the first iteration of the bill came out, I remember getting a call from someone that says, "Oh, it looks like you're going to have a whole bunch of small-scale multi-unit homes because you're at that population, you're in the greater, Victoria region. It's coming your way." We found out we didn't apply for that. Mayor Little wrote a great letter just pointing out some of the limitations, again, we had with sewer and water, and I think that had resonated with the government. But the one thing we have done is just made sure we've doing our part in terms of meeting the requirements. And I think Ms. Johnson's laid that out very well for us. And I don't see any option or benefit to deviating from that. So, yeah. Any other comments? If not, any other comments? Okay, I will call the question. All in favor of the motion? And opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Committee, do you have any other comments? Because if you don't, we've done the job and the task that was before us when we sat down an hour and a half ago. Any other comments? And just know, of course, that there will be much more coming, and there'll be a lot of public input in all of this as well. So, okay, if not, I will take a motion to adjourn. Great, Councillor Donaldson, Councillor Epp. All in favor? Great. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for attending today. So. Thanks everyone.